This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy. Tiffanee Cook, I'd like to welcome you and Roll with the Punches to the Self-Help Antidote podcast, and vice versa. I'd like to welcome myself to your show because this is a share show, which is kind of like, that's like a drinking game. Like take a couple of shots, say that 10 times in a row, but it's great to be back. We've had a very long break, too long for me personally. How you going, Tiff?
I'm going good, and it feels like such a long time. Just this morning, I recorded with Mark LeBusque, and same thing. I haven't done an episode with him since last year either. Where did January go? It's February the 1st. What the hell?
It really did fly by. Now I'm not wiping my eyes because I'm all choked up and emotional that I haven't seen you in a while. Although I'm wiping my eyes because I've got 37 lights on in this place. If you couldn't tell.
Yeah, you got a lot of mood lighting. I was going to say, and you've got a Buddha statue in the background, but it's actually a black skull. Is that a human skull?
No, it's not a human skull. It's actually not meant to be like all goth and scary. It's meant to be academic and nerdy because if you take a look at the skull, it is sitting right on top of my Grey's Anatomy book. So it's kind of like a nod to all the nerds out there like myself. But you have to be a fellow nerd in order to get it. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the point. But the other thing behind me is a little gargoyle. He is a little bit like slightly on the edge of goth, actually.
I've got a question just come to me. I was thinking, to start of the year. Year's nearly bloody over already. But after we hear a lot about the whole New Year's resolution bullshit, and we carry on a lot about that. A lot of self-helpers carry on about that, either preaching it or I feel like this year, whether it was just my immediate circle, but I just felt like everyone was kind of sticking it to the New Year's resolution. I feel like that's been the leading trend where everyone's just like, oh, fuck New Year's resolutions, they don't work and all this and that. And so you start to buy into that philosophy as fuck New Year's resolutions. And then in the middle of that new paradigm, is there that realization that, yeah, but it kind of works because routine's broken. And when routine's broken, there's a fresh new chance to get some differing perspectives when you're not running on the same autopilot, when every day is not the same as it was and there's a bit of time and space to get perspective. And especially for you, because you had your little stint coming out and being with us in Australia for a little bit and then going home. And I just thought I'd ask what for you over that experience and that time and then Christmas and then resettling in your job, what have you, like, did anything pop up in terms of changes or perspectives or things that you want to do differently that maybe you hadn't even thought of before Christmas?
Wow, that's a big question. And yes, I've spent about, 3,600 hours probably thinking about the answer to that. And the short answer is I've been completely burnt out and exhausted since coming home. I mean, moving across the world and back within a month is hard. But then you pick up and move cities straight after that over the holidays. So I did not have a Christmas, New Year. I didn't have not even a day to decompress. It was full on in the midst of working. And that's why I chose Christmas, because Christmas Day, it's like, okay, I could get a lot done. And it's just been, if I don't go full on, I can't put it in first gear because I won't have the energy. I actually have to floor it in order to build some momentum and keep going. So it's been rough, but when you have such a life change and then another one within 30 days, you have to start to ask yourself the question, what did I learn from this? And I think there's a lot of lessons to unpack. One is I've got to be more clear about what it is that I need because stating what you need in life is not selfish. It is quintessentially the thing that you need to lay down in order to have an energy reserve and a psychological reserve to be your best for other people. Because when something goes wrong, you've got to ask yourself the question, as I have, okay, how did I contribute to this? That's the first question. And the second question is, in what way did I not contribute to this? Because you don't want to blame yourself for everything, but you want to take responsibility for the things that you brought to a situation. And no matter what happens, there's always something that you've done in an ongoing situation. I'm not saying you walk down the street and you get mugged, you get hit in the face with a brick, and then they take your, I don't know, they take your sandwich, which is hard because I love sandwiches. That's horrible. I'm not saying you brought that upon yourself or you shouldn't walk down that, but there are things that you can say, all right, well, what did I bring to the situation? What could I have done differently? And when you're talking about ongoing relationship dynamics, I would say 99.9% of the time, there's something that you have done or multiple things you did that created the situation you were in. And I had an episode recently with someone, Roy Sugarman. I don't know if you know him personally, but you definitely know of him. Do you know who I'm talking about? Dr. Roy Sugarman?
Yes. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Before I came to Australia, me and you were talking a lot about paradox, how two things can be true at the same time. And then, he was talking a bit about irony, where a lot of times we're quite rigid with ourselves. And I know that's a default mechanism that I consistently get into. Like, my wife will hear me talking about myself and she'll be like, whoa, I've never heard you say something that ugly about anybody. What are you doing? And it's like, well, I'm holding myself accountable. It's like, no, you're not. Because the only way to get to true accountability is through forgiveness. Because if you're not forgiving yourself and saying, okay, I'm fallible, and there are things that were affecting me that caused me to behave or react in a certain way, and that's okay. I need to make it right. I need to take responsibility. And if there are other people involved, I need to make amends. But if I forgive myself for something, I could take a more balanced, objective look at, okay, what exactly went wrong? And what steps should I engage in next time to make sure that this has a much less likelihood of occurring? And without forgiveness, there's no accountability, because you get into blame. You get into blaming yourself, or you get into blaming other people because you're lashing out and you're angry. And when you're in such an emotionally charged state, you're not as objective as you could be, which means you're not going to be able to identify in an act of reflection what could be different. So good luck making those changes. So you're basically talking yourself into perpetuating the same patterns that brought about that situation in the first place.
One thing you said about your stating your needs, right? Stating what you need. How do you, or how can we navigate and manage the relationship of self-abandonment, that idea of abandoning ourselves in order to be of service or of use, or to be like how do we hold space for being what somebody needs, whether that's in a relationship or in a business or in a circumstance? How do we give without abandoning ourselves in the process? How do we manage our own needs?
Wow. What you are, I think it's probably because we haven't podcasted for a while, but I forgot how insightful your questions are. It's like they're borderline annoying because they're so insightful.
I just bamboozle you with how long I take to ask them.
So I'm going to be talking about Roy Sugarman a little bit, because I'm also doing something with my team right now. And we're going through the whole, who are we? What's our identity as a team? And why does it matter? Firstly, why does it matter to us? Because if it doesn't matter to us and it's not clear to us, well, good luck communicating why it matters to anybody else. But as we're going through this, it's kind of interesting because we were talking about the whole perspective of free will, and that's a whole different story. I don't want to get too far from the center of what you're asking. But Roy was talking about what we want a lot of times and what our brain is wired for is autonomy and a sense of agency. And not even that, because if you go back to the philosopher Eric Hoffer, and he talks about the true believer, and the True Believer was a book about how mass movements get started. And he was talking about not a mass movement around raising money or charity, usually highly destructive mass movements. How do you get ordinary people to come together and very often do horrible things? And one of the things he was saying is everybody wants freedom until they have it. And what Roy was saying is it's not the thing that we want, it's the sense of it that we want. I want to have a sense that I have autonomy. I'm doing things for my own reasons because this is something that is aligned with my identity. And choice starts to become a more complicated subject, but my identity is aligned with this thing. And I have the capacity and the ability to recognize and leverage resources to bring that fruition to end and facilitate that process. So when you are doing something for someone else, I think it's a matter of being very clear, going back to values. What are the values that you have autonomously selected? Are these mine? Is this something that, mom and dad told me I should value, that I should be, or I should have, or I should do? Or are they different? Because I've meditated long on them, and I've reflected upon incidences where I was aligned with what I wanted, and I felt fully alive and whole and engaged. And it was this that created that situation. And that is what I value. I want to embody that and be the possibility for that in every situation I come into. Then when you're acting in that way and it contributes to someone, especially someone who me and you had quite spirited conversations around this in Australia, mostly because I was ranting and raving like a lunatic in your car. But I think there are people in our lives that we have a responsibility to. And I know it's popular saying, well, you're not responsible for other people. No, you're not responsible for their happiness and their outcomes, but you are responsible based on the context of the relationship for certain things. A parent kind of is responsible to feed and clothe a child to a certain point. Now, are you responsible for them growing up being completely self-actualized and happy and successful people? You want to set the foundation for that. You want to provide them with encouragement and love and equal challenge to support. Because when support is unbalanced and related to challenge or vice versa, it can create some negative outcomes, but you want to have that balance as a parent. But you're not ultimately responsible. At some point, that child is now an adult and they become responsible, but you are responsible for certain things, certain implicit promises within the relationship. And sometimes people talk about that when you're talking about not like parent and child, but two adults. Well, how do those promises show up? What do we promise to be? What do we not promise to be? And a lot of times when you're acting out of your values, and that contributes to someone in a way that is meaningful to them, that's how I define purpose. We've talked about this on that show, on this show, that show. What show am I even talking about? On this show many times.
How long it's been since we've recorded.
I think where the line becomes, where the line is drawn that you are now in need of setting boundaries because you are sacrificing yourself, is what I'm doing diminishing my sense of autonomy and agency. Like, as I engage in this, am I becoming less capable to hold space for this person and fulfill my promises? because I'm not focusing on my own needs? And is it getting harder and harder for me to meet my own needs, which kind of becomes like this vicious circle? So am I and what's important to me disappearing? Is it in contradiction to my values? Does it violate my autonomy on an ongoing basis? And is this pattern that I'm perpetuating decreasing my sense of agency and the agency that I exact in the world? I think that is, for me anyway, a good metric. I don't know if that's the answer, but talking about it out loud, that is my answer.
And I think I think you're bang on. But as I listen to you talk about it and reflect on my last experience that I have in mind for myself, where I saw this clearly play out, and when I was in the middle of that self-sacrificing, self-abandonment, almost a state of prolonged, really dissociation. It took months and months and months out of it, literally in lockdown, to even come out of it and get perspective. So it's really like and so what that left me with was then when I moved forward into new business ventures, new relationships, new people, new commercial relationships and personal relationships, a real sense of, I don't know, I was very tentative, very responsive and reactive emotionally, and very careful, but then also over time really aware of that. So, and finding it hard, because how do you trust the current perception and your emotions in the middle of it? Like when you go into someone's life, let's put it in I feel like a relationship context, because people would listen to this and understand that when you get out of a relationship that's not good for you. So for me, it wasn't a personal relationship, but there was a situation that wasn't good. And then I went into new situations and I was so fearful of abandoning myself. I said no to great opportunities. And I was also very careful of how much to give, and you have to give. Like, I'm all about give value, give generosity, do stuff for other people. But I'd just been burned so hard that there was a part of me that even unconsciously was not allowing me the walls were up, and it really took patience from myself and I think from the other people around me, and patience and understanding to build good relationships and situations and circumstances from there.
So this is something that happened to I know what you're talking about too. No, this happened to you during the lockdown. And it wasn't directly related to the lockdown. Yeah. It was related to another situation in which you went in with high levels of trust and aspiration, and it turned out to be painful for you. And that made you a little bit apprehensive about engaging in other types of ventures, because what if this happens again?
Yeah. Yeah. But we can just lean so far the other way, and I will never abandon. I was like, I don't ever want to, once that fog lifted and I kind of felt like I was at the outside looking in, I remember thinking with such clarity, wow, I had become such a small version of myself. I'm not even the person I was before I went into that whole thing. I feel I've locked myself away emotionally and in a whole range of ways. And then it was like there's part of me just went, I'll never let that happen again. And so the walls go up, and it's like they go up too high. They go up too strong. No one is like, well, if you are going to never abandon yourself, and subconsciously your version of that is no one will ever have the opportunity to let me down because I'll never let them in. whether that's in business or friendship or relationships, you're abandoning yourself from the get-go. I'll never give myself anything to lose because people will take it away.
Well, the question there becomes, is it other people as a result of this experience that you don't trust? Or is it other people as well as yourself you do not trust?
When I unpacked trust over the last year, it became screamingly obvious that there is only the trust that I don't have for me, because the trust of other people comes back to my ability to trust the right people, and that's what I can't trust. So it's not even about, can I trust this person? It's like, can I trust me to pick the right people? Because I haven't before. So it's always the trust in self.
And that is where forgiveness comes in. Because when it's like, I'll never trust again, you're not saying I'll never trust other people again. You're saying, I'm not going to trust myself again.
Yeah.
I've gone through that in business situations where business was intertwined with strong emotions. And I'll use the word love, with strong love between people. And when that didn't go right, it also fell apart at the same time as a personal relationship, a romantic relationship. And at that point, I was like, well, I can't trust my ability to judge a situation. And then it's like, it goes through, wow, Bobby, you are so, and here comes the self-accusations and the condemnation, or how could you be so, fill in the blanks. If you don't forgive yourself, you can never step back and go, okay, what did I learn from that? And what would I need to know, or what would I need to have in order to be able to trust myself to where I cannot predict what other people are going to do, but I could be more prepared to enter into a relationship within boundaries that create the structure for a healthy working or romantic, fill in the blanks, any type of relationship. And I will know this about myself because I've recognized it and I've done the work to develop it, where I do not have to be held hostage by a potential outcome that has not even happened in the world yet. It is an imagined circumstance. I am predicting a problem that does not exist in the real world. Like, okay, Tiff, I will meet you. I will meet you at Snap Fitness, but I'm afraid to get into the car because what if I get into an accident? Wait, where'd that come from? That accident doesn't exist yet. Is it a possibility? Yeah, but there are a million possibilities. I can have a flat, I could, I don't know, lose my mind and just stop off for a kebab and like forget the gym and be late. There's so many things that can go on, but why that outcome? Don't plague yourself and weigh yourself down with problems that have not occurred yet, especially if you're not on your way to them. It's something that is in your imagination because it's your interpretation of what has happened in the past. Because when you talk about losing yourself, your whole sense of self is how you interact with other people. That sense of self emerges between the intersection of me and you, and that dynamic. People are made to intermingle with one another. So if I limit my interactions with people, I'll never fully regain myself. It's like saying, well, it's like I lost a race as a champion rower. And, I feel like my team let me down and I picked the wrong team and I don't trust myself. But you know what? I'm going to work on developing my capacity and become the athlete I used to be. But I'm just never going to get into a boat again, because that boat was the environment that created that loss. Well, if you don't get in the boat, you're never going to regain yourself. And if you don't have a team, you're never going to win competitive rowing. So I don't know where that analogy came from. I've never used a rowing analogy in my entire life, but it seems to work for this point. Does that make sense though, what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. And paradoxically, mind you, annoyingly, I use that word so much now, obsessed with paradox.
It's everywhere.
But it's those experiences that it's almost still hard to say grateful, but I am grateful for them because without them, the work that I've done to move forward, which has resulted in better relationships, both with self, but more so with others. Still a lot of work to do on the self relationship, I reckon. But that's where all this started. It didn't even really exist to any degree before some of these hard things. And then all of a sudden it was like, these are skills that people have to learn. Like there's all this new stuff in my awareness now. And it wouldn't even be in my awareness, so I wouldn't be able to work on it. So I'd just be still floating around building, whatever world I was in a state of semi-unawareness. That makes sense? I'm not good at making sense. I just make words up sometimes.
No, you're great at making sense. If you were just making words up, it's like I wouldn't even understand because I would have to interpret a word that you just made up and you didn't notify me prior to making up the words. I'm just like, what is she talking about? But no, you make a lot of sense to me. I don't know if that's something that I should be concerned about or if me and you just resonate, but you make a lot of sense. And the learning of the lessons and how you put those lessons into practice is hard. It's difficult. But if learning seems difficult, the alternative is ignorance. That's a lot harder.
But that's where that term ignorance is bliss, and I've used it in other scenarios, but that, as you said that, like just the light bulb was going off in my head because it was that was, I guess, encompasses the point I was thinking of was it's almost emotionally easier to be ignorant. And then once you're aware of something, it feels very hard. I think that's where this stuckness can come from like, I can't do it. I'm trapped by this because this is hard. Well, it was always hard. You just were ignorant to it before. Now you have the opportunity to level up, create better things, have better outcomes. But the cost of that is being fully aware and stepping into developing a skill that you now know exists that you have to learn to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the ironic things that I've been contemplating lately is if you don't have awareness, you don't have psychological flexibility and you have a smaller locus of control. So you might be ignorantly blissful riding along in a train, looking at the countryside, but there's nobody at the helm. At some point, you're going to derail and slam right into a wall. And then you're going to be very aware of the fact that you were ignorant to the reality of the situation, regardless of how blissful it felt. So
great analogy.
Thank you. It was better than the rowing analogy.
If you look at that analogy in terms of life, it's almost like because you think about, ignorant people are some of the happiest people. If you could live your life ignorantly blissful until smack bang at the end and then it's just shit and you're like, oh well, but your whole life was blissful, or you could be aware and in this state of grappling to a certain degree, the inattention of resolving things and getting better at it, creating better outcomes, being with that idea of taking ownership and responsibility. What choice would you make? And what choice do you think most people would make?
I think it depends on the area of ignorance. So I have a friend of mine, and she is a brilliant person, but she has always had an unreasonable level of trust and faith in people's intentions. And her husband was always saying to her, listen, not everybody is good. Some people are dangerous to be around, or at the very least unhealthy. But every interaction she would have, she was I don't want to say ignorant, but she always assumed that if somebody was misbehaving or revealing a part of their personality that was malicious, they were masking something else, and something else was going on underneath that. And she was going to have the most generous interpretation and response to that, thinking that underneath it all, they're really a great person. So because it was amazing, because she would react to hostility with humor. She would diffuse the situation. She would react with trust and openness and outright love. And people respond to her in a way that they didn't respond to anybody else. So that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And eventually she started looking and noticing things, because she's like, okay, my husband, I respect him. He's pretty smart. And let me look around, wow, some people don't have the best of intentions. She's like, you know what? I want to be ignorantly bliss to this, because I don't need to know this. I'm not going to let somebody hurt me. I'll be aware of somebody crossing a boundary where, okay, if this goes any further, it might not be good for me, but I want to believe this. But when it comes to something in yourself and you choose to be ignorant about it because you think ignorance is bliss, that's a withdrawal that you are making from your psychological flexibility that at some point leaves you rigid and unadaptable. And the more unadaptable you are, the more vulnerable you are. You cannot afford to be willfully ignorant about things pertaining to yourself and the domain of self-awareness. Other things, you kind of can be, because you don't know. We've discussed this as well. You don't know what's right and what's wrong. There are so many variables. You know what's right and wrong for you, but you can't read a situation. Like, you have an opinion about somebody, and then you find out that their circumstances creates a context that made you completely wrong. So, okay, fine. When it comes to these things, I don't need to know the absolute truth about another person or another thing. And if I choose to believe something, it may not be true, it may not be false, but it's highly constructive. You can't do that related to yourself, because something's going to happen that's going to force you to focus your attention. And that thing's going to be more painful than it needs to be. Pain is constructive in life. It tells us, hey, pay attention. But suffering excessively beyond its usefulness doesn't make any sense. I think the way you prepare yourself is to constantly reflect. And the more you reflect, you learn about yourself.
I've missed out how deep our chats go.
But, when I was in Australia, like, a lot of our chats seemed to revolve around Woolies. I remember I was very excited, how beautiful the Woolworths was in St. Kilda versus Balaclava. It's like, I thought that I had won the lottery when I had walked into Woolworths. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I love this place. I would walk the aisles in absolute awe, buying chickens.
Isn't this is one thing that in terms of our environment where we live, and I live in Elwood, and it's one thing I'm good at is when I'm out for walks, catching myself and going, hey, don't ever forget for a moment while you're here how lucky you are and how beautiful we got all these beautiful plane trees. It's just the greenest suburb. It's beautiful. I'm right near the St Kilda Gardens, and I walk through it, and when it's summer or spring and the trees are all green and beautiful, and they reach over, arch all the way over the street. So the street is covered in by this big arch of trees. And I'm just like, if I didn't live in this part, in a city, I'm a stone's throw from the city and the beach, but a stone's throw from St Kilda, where there's just buildings and riffraff. And I'm like, take this in. I'm so busy in my mind in every other aspect of life. And I'm really proud that I always do that. I always go, you will never, if you're ever living anywhere else, you will never have to look back and go, gee, I wish I appreciated what I had.
Yeah. You see, to me, that's true gratitude.
Yeah, the novelty of a new, like hearing you talk about how a supermarket, it's such a novel thing. Like the people are different, the place is different. This is amazing. And it's just
it's
a
like
supermarket.
Nobody's using the toilet in the middle of the aisle. Like, that's amazing. It's like there's a designated place for that, and everybody goes there for the most part. It's like, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that's how I've always framed gratitude, to where some people have a gratitude journal and there's a lot of evidence to support that really does work. That is a good practice. But for me, it's stop, look around and notice where you are. And I know every time I've been in Melbourne, not just back in my last visit, I've done that, because Melbourne is a ridiculously beautiful city. It is absolutely gorgeous. Anyone who lives in Melbourne, I think, is lucky to live in Melbourne. But there's two types of people. There's people that have their head down and my city is my city. Okay, this is just what it is. This is the world. It's not the world. It's your world. And then there's people who stop. And I was like this. I'm a native New Yorker. And I am like this every time I've lived in New York, every time now I'm not living in New York. But when I go back to visit, I will stop, look around and go, oh, I love this place. This was darkly prophetic. But I would say about less than 2 weeks before 9/11, I was walking through the World Trade Center, because for reasons I still can't understand, I was living down by Ground Zero in the financial district. No New Yorkers back then lived in the financial district, but I was doing it for a certain, well, I don't want to say for a certain reason, for a certain person. And I was walking with my girlfriend through the World Trade Center. I just stopped and I was just looking around the city, and she's like, oh, I'm sick of this. Everywhere we go, it's like, you'll just stop and look around like you're a tourist. You're born and raised here. You're living here. And I was like, one day, all this shit that you're looking at is not going to be here. So I want to stop and be here now and enjoy this. And in less than 2 weeks, none of it was there anymore in the most horrific way possible. But that reinforced wherever I am, like me walking around, like in London, I would stop constantly in awe and just take in the city, because there are some places that just have this energetic resonance where I cannot articulate why I love this place so much. And I don't know where it ends and I begin when I'm here, but I do. And that's when I really do stop and take that in. That is not ever lost on me.
I reckon the first time that this awareness was embedded in me was a couple of years after I moved to Melbourne. It would have been at least 2, if not 3 years. I went home for my pop's birthday, and who, by the way, in about 7 days, 6 days, turns 100 years old. But I went home for his birthday. Yeah, so this would have been 20 years ago-ish, close to it. Went home for his birthday, and we hired this hall out in the country, and this is in Tassie. And I remember I was sitting in the back of the car, and we were just driving through country Tassie. And I was just in awe, because I'd just spent 2 to 3 years in Melbourne in the hustle and bustle, and just working a lot, and working in hospitality, and going to school on the side of that, going into the CBD, and it was just busy, and it was great. Like, it was everything I wanted it to be. And I went back, and I remember looking out the window and just being so almost emotional at the view. I was like, oh, how have I never seen this place this way? Because I grew up there, I lived there, I saw it all the time. Just the country and the air and the beauty. And I was like, oh my God. And then maybe that's why I do that now. When I go to the city of an evening, I always reflect about how it felt the first time I saw that, and how I said one day I'll live in Melbourne. And I do it when I'm down at Port Melbourne Beach, because I remember coming over on the boat and looking along the beach, the bike path, and going, wow, one day I'm going to live in Melbourne and I'm going to rollerblade along this bike track, you know, and I did that. I'd rollerbladed for years and I always stop and pause and remember that.
Yeah.
So good.
I've walked along that bike track, which I
Good as
probably
that
shouldn't
bike
have.
track. You should have rollerbladed.
Yeah, I didn't have rollerblades on. So I figured I would just annoy everybody else. No, it's a stunning city. And I think you need to, it's very good for your physical and mental health to stop and appreciate what is around you in some capacity.
It was the clincher. I just said to Mark on our last podcast, so my listeners that are listening through are going to be like, all right, you've already said that, shut up. But it was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on me getting a bike again, because I was recently on the back of someone's scooter and within 5 minutes it was the full-bodied sense of presence. When I'm driving, it's mindless. It's mindless. I'm not even aware that I'm doing it. You know, I'm mindless all the time. And I just sat on the back of this bike and there's the wind in your ears and in your face. Obviously you got a helmet on, but in your face, and the movement of the bike, and you just have to be so present in the driving. You're not in this floating little cubicle where you know where you're going and you're safe. It's like you've got to be so alert. And it's like boxing for me. It was like, oh, I can shut down 90% of the noise when I get from point A to point B, and I can turn those moments into an experience. So good.
That is something I think that goes back to your original question. How do you know when the difference between being there for someone and helping to focus on their needs and what they want and being of service to them versus losing yourself in the process? I think everybody has a source. And does what you're doing disconnect you from source? And for some people, that's being in the ring. For some people, you're not the first person I've heard say that. My ex-girlfriend, Amanda, she talked about being on a bike and what that does for her and being completely present, where you have to pay attention to absolutely everything. And you can't think about the argument you had yesterday or what you're going to do with your client an hour from now. You have to be right there and be present, and being on that bike just plugged her into source where she was more effective at everything she did. For me, that's being on stage. For some people, it's playing an instrument or writing. Is what I'm doing taking me away from the thing that gives me the most joy in life, or the things to where I'm not plugged into that? And I'm almost like a spectator of myself. I feel detached from myself because that's so much a part of me and what I need. And that's something I've struggled with at certain points after COVID, because I couldn't be on stage, obviously, at multiple points. And I feel like I'm losing myself. Like there's almost like a power supply that I was always plugged into. And now I can't get back to that. And I don't feel that energetic flow.
I love that. Missed you, Bobby. I
missed you too, Tiff. I know we've struggled, and a lot of it's been, again, me just trying to catch my rhythm. I have struggled to get my rhythm back over the past few months, because it's been right before I came out to Australia, everything changed in my life within those 7 days, and not for the better. Like it was, and people who I really cared about needed me, and I had commitments that were outstanding that I needed to fulfill. And there was so many things going on. When I got back, the first thing I did when I got back was I got on a plane to go see someone, because they were sick. And that plane ride was like cross country. It was thousands of miles. And then I got back and I was like, okay, now I need to pick up and move, because somebody expects that of me. I need to do that as a commitment. And I picked up, and it's just like, oh my days, when everything settled, I realized I am so exhausted. I'm missing things. So here's something that's embarrassing, right?
Mhm.
My wife I came home and there were signs all over the place, like literally everywhere, on the cupboards, on the table, on the front door, saying, close the refrigerator, close the door when you leave the house. Like all the like things where I feel like I'm losing my mind. Like who just like walks out, it just doesn't shut the door, walks away from the fridge, it doesn't like close it. It's like, who leaves their trainers in the freezer? I mean, it's just all these things where it's like, wow, this is concerning. And my wife has to write all these notes. Your name is Bobby Cappuccio. You live at, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. I felt like I was the star in the film Memento, the sequel. Remember where he had to tattoo all these notes all over his body because he couldn't remember anything? And that's literally how I was functioning. And would adding more stuff and going out and being on stage at this point, would that help me? Probably would. Because even though it seems additive and it's huge and it's my source.
Well, I hope that February is some time for you to recoup, get back on stage.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling better already. And the team that I'm working with, they're fantastic. Like each of them are extraordinary. And a lot of times I said, well, I'm leading a consulting team. No, I'm pretty much supporting a consulting team. They're leading me half the time. But so I'm looking forward to doing a lot of stuff. There's things that I'm excited about day to day, which I think is critical. Like waking up and being excited about something.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be work. For me, a lot of that lives there, but it could be, again, like hitting the road with your new bike.
Yes.
But be excited every day.
I'm writing that down. Be excited every day. That's going to be my motto. I've nailed it this week.
I should tape that to my cupboards before I forget it.
Yeah. Bobby, it's been so good to see you again. Our listeners have missed you they have on my show.
I've missed being here. I've missed them.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. We will be back in not too long.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.